The $26 silver hurdle. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto, and the Gold and Silver Standard as the Ainslie Group celebrates 50 years. Today, we welcome back Alex, who's been closely watching the very exciting price moves we've seen in gold, but also the growing enthusiasm around silver over the past few days. How are you going today, Alex?
I'm going well. How are you?
Very good.
I
And
think
I
I'm
know
nearly
you've been
going as
watching
well
it.
as silver.
Well, yeah,
Nearly as you go.
the, I was just going to say the silver one is something that we've been watching for so long, and we just really it's been that trade that you went, oh, gold, you've got to watch gold, and then it'll happen eventually. It'll happen eventually. Has it just happened?
Well, I mean, there's the argument, isn't it? $26 has been a big hurdle for 2 years. Silver has knocked on it quite a bit. And last night it pierced through it like pretty strongly. So it's nearly 30 cents up per ounce now. So as of a week ago, it was around 24.4. And it's now at 26.1. So it's a huge steep climb very quickly. It's now outperforming gold, which for context, the gold last all-time high back when silver had an all-time high was around $49 an ounce in 2011 for silver, and gold was around 1800. So gold now is at 2288 and silver is half where its previous all-time high was. So there's just a lot of catching up to be done.
And we've been talking about this for so long that when it does move, it has these big moves, and that catch up, like we really do expect that catch up to happen at some point. That was a huge differential that you pointed out in the article about where the price would be today, because wasn't it 60, above $60 if it was just that same gold silver
Yeah,
ratio as it was back then?
yeah, and I mean that was probably quite an aggressive high on the ratio.
Mm.
Normally it sort of sits around 50, that got down to 30. Currently it's sitting at 80, 90. So, look at that as an outlier, but really look at the current situation as a bit of an outlier as well.
Mm.
I think the reason silver has lagged is because everyone knows there's something wrong with the economies, but all the data says something different. So people are buying gold, central banks are buying gold, and silver's just been ignored because the data says we're not in a recession, there's no problem here, look somewhere else. And maybe people are starting to look at the data a bit differently now. And that's when silver really starts performing, when people start looking at it again as a precious metal rather than an industrial metal.
Mm.
At that point in time when silver, always has its uses for industrial, and it will trade quite closely with copper. But then something like this happens and it suddenly reverses, and this is when it starts leaping over gold, when it really starts being seen as a precious metal and a hedge for mayhem.
And you made that point really well in the article as well, that this dual role that you just talked about, this industrial metal side and the precious metal side, that it's almost like a psychological shift that happens in people's minds where they go, well, silver is no longer the industrial metal. Now we've decided it's the precious metal. But do you think you also highlight in the article about the volume that we've seen that could be related to this silver squeeze idea, this silver squeeze movement? Can you maybe talk us through that, you're thinking there a little bit, and also what happened last time we saw that silver squeeze?
Well, the last silver squeeze was, I think, back around COVID. I'm now not going to do this very well, but it got to very quickly to around $28, $29 an ounce. And it's when I think Wall Street Silver was one that was really promoting it, and saying silver squeeze, stack. It was right around GameStop. It followed about a week after the highs that GameStop started seeing, and silver rocketed. Last night was the highest trading volume in 2 years. And if you look on Twitter right now, silver squeeze is the leading, one of the leading things that is being searched for. So people seem to be starting to wake up. What is interesting though, is usually platinum will lead before silver. Platinum gets seen as a precious metal beforehand.
Yep.
And that actually hasn't happened yet. So the dynamics in play right now are quite different to what has happened previously.
And you could argue that's the case in many of the economic sort of indicators and situations that we're seeing unfolding at the moment. A lot of things are happening a little bit differently to how they have historically. I suppose that leads to my next question around the implications from the global economy generally, because it really is a very confusing mess for anyone trying to analyze this at the moment. You've got what are seemingly very good conditions coming out of the US, where we've got, I noted the ISM sort of indicating growth in the US that had just pushed over 50 for the first time in over a year and a half. So we've got an indication that we've got growth in the US. We've got inflation relatively stable. I mean, whether that's as low as it should be or not is certainly we could debate for a long time. But how does silver fit into this aspect of it, where you've got really very confusing signs? And you made the point in the article that we've got, yes, these good conditions in the US, but everywhere else are not so great.
Yeah, so I mean, silver and gold are really starting to reach, I mean, gold's reaching all-time highs in the US. Silver is now starting to reach, and certainly in the yen and things like that, despite it being significantly lower than where it was previously, just because of the devaluation of currencies against it. So definitely that is going on. You talk about the ISM, when that data came out, that was that drop to 24.4 for silver. So that was when people went, oh no, look, it's all good over here. It dropped, it was around 25.3, I think, and then it dropped to 24.4 overnight. And then very quickly it's now pulled back up, which says to me people are starting to see things differently. We've spoken about GDP recessions everywhere. I've read data around the US data that they changed the way that they were looking at housing. And actually, if you threw housing back in on data that was collected in the 1980s, it would actually, the inflation from housing, which is incredibly high across the world for all CPI baskets, would actually be 4 times higher in the US. So their inflation would not be at the level they're reporting. And people, I think, are really starting to recognize GDP recession over just capital, migrants, fiscal policies from the governments, just band-aiding some pretty poor economies out there right now.
And do you think, sort of adding to that discussion, this idea of supply and demand, particularly when we're looking at silver, is going to come into play there as well? Because you've got a situation where supply really has, I mean, the price has been relatively sideways, pretty stagnant for a long time. Supply sort of shriveled up a little bit, but you've got the demand that was already above supply for a long period of time, and now some more of this silver being considered a precious metal, silver being a necessary part of people's portfolios, that could drive a whole lot of new demand. Not to mention if we saw that popular demand pick up from something like the silver squeeze movement. How do you see the supply and demand dynamics for silver specifically come into play with all of that background?
So in the article, there was referenced a report from the Silver Institute, which came out in January 2024. That was done with Metals Focus, who we all speak to in the industry all the time. They were looking at basically the investment side lagging things this year. And really, for the last 4 years, we've been in deficit in silver. The mines are producing around 1 million ounces, and the demand, oh, sorry, is it 1 billion? Anyway, ounces, and the demand is 1.2. So
still 20% difference there. Like,
there's a 20% difference, and I'm not going to get the numbers the right way, so I'm just going to say it's 20% difference. But they were talking where the silver has come from over the last 4 years is the fact that there's been surge of investment in silver pretty much since 2000 and probably 11, and really picked up over COVID. So those stores of silver have been sold and put back into industry and put back into jewelry. Now, the Silver Institute was talking about there being not much investment demand or dropping this year. Well, if there is a change in people's perception on silver, and silver is suddenly a precious metal again and a store of value, they will not be selling that metal back to the market. And the deficit has the potential to be bigger than they forecast, which is probably the issue that we're going to see around the silver squeeze, which is if people decide to keep the silver or start buying silver as an investment, that deficit potentially can go much higher.
well, lots to think about in terms of silver, but at the moment, price is high and it still hasn't broken those all-time highs. It's nowhere near those all-time highs. It still hasn't broken even the recent highs. So is the advice the same as it always seems to be from us, that you need to have at least a little bit of silver in your portfolio?
stack up right now.
Stack up right now. A great note to end on, I think. Thanks so much for your work on that today, Alex.
Thank you for having me again.
Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll chat again soon.